In 1933, a woman named Edna Frazier in Harlan County, Kentucky, fed her family of 5 on $11 a month. She did it with a single 10-inch cast iron skillet that had belonged to her mother, and before that, her mother's mother. She made 15 meals in rotation, week after week, and not one of her children went to bed hungry. Not one. That skillet is number 4 on this list. Number 7 is a meal so simple it has only 3 ingredients, and it kept Appalachian miners working 12-hour shifts underground. Number 2 is something your grandmother almost certainly made without ever calling it by a name, because it did not need one. These 15 meals were not accidents of poverty. They were engineered solutions built by women who understood heat and fat and time better than any culinary school graduate alive today. They fed families through depressions and droughts and wars and the long, quiet emergencies that never make history books. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 15 forgotten poor man cast iron skillet meals your grandmother made every week. Number 15, fried salt pork and gravy. You took a slab of salt pork, rinsed it if you had water to spare, and sliced it into thick coins, maybe a 1/4 inch each. You laid those coins into a cold cast iron skillet and let the heat come up slow, rendering the fat out of the meat before the meat had a chance to toughen. The skillet filled with white fat that smelled of smoke and salt. When the coins were brown and crisp at the edges, you pulled them out and set them aside. Then you sprinkled 2 tablespoons of flour directly into that hot fat, stirred it fast with a wooden spoon until the flour went golden and smelled like toasted grain, and poured in enough water or milk to make a gravy that coated the back of the spoon. Salt, black pepper, done. You poured that gravy over the pork and served it with whatever bread you had. By 1880, a pound of salt pork cost roughly 12 cents at frontier trading posts and general stores across the rural South and Midwest. A pound fed a family of 4 at supper and had enough fat left in the pan to fry eggs for breakfast. This was not a side dish. This was the architecture of a meal. The gravy stretched the pork flavored the gravy. Nothing left the skillet wasted. Number 14. Cornmeal mush with cracklins. You brought water to a boil in the skillet, salted it, and poured in cornmeal in a slow, steady stream, stirring constantly so it did not seize into lumps. You stirred for 20 minutes. Your arm ached. You kept stirring. The mush thickened into something that held its shape when you pressed a spoon into it. Then you scattered cracklins across the top, those small, hard pieces of rendered pork skin that crackled between your teeth and released a burst of deep, salty fat into the soft grain underneath. Cornmeal cost about 2 cents a pound in the rural South through most of the early 20th century. A 2-pound bag made enough mush to feed a family for 2 meals. The cracklins were free if you had rendered your own lard that week, which most families did. German and Scots-Irish families in the Appalachian Mountains ate this at least twice a week through the 1930s and 1940s. It was hot, it was filling, it was built for people who had been working since before dawn and needed something that would hold them through the night. Nobody called it comfort food. They called it supper. Number 13, skillet potato soup. 3 potatoes, 1 onion, a knob of bacon grease, water, and salt. That was the whole recipe. You melted the bacon grease in the skillet over medium heat, sliced the onion thin, and cooked it until it went soft and translucent and faintly sweet. Then you added the potatoes, cut into rough cubes, poured in enough water to cover them by an inch, and let the whole thing simmer until the potatoes were soft enough to crush against the side of the pan with a wooden spoon. You crushed about 1/3 of them to thicken the broth, left the rest in chunks, and adjusted the salt. If you had milk, you added a splash at the end. If you had dried parsley, you added a pinch. Most days you had neither. The soup was still good. In 1935, at the height of the Depression, a family of 4 in rural Minnesota could make this soup for under 15 cents. It was warm. It was filling. It tasted like something someone had made for you on purpose, which mattered more than any nutritional calculation. There is a specific kind of poverty that takes away the feeling of being cared for. A bowl of hot potato soup pushed back against that. Number 12, pan-fried cornbread. This is not baked cornbread. This is cornbread cooked entirely in the skillet on the stovetop, no oven required, which mattered enormously to families who could not afford to heat an oven or who were cooking over an open fire. You mixed cornmeal, a pinch of salt, a little bacon grease, and enough water to make a thick batter that barely poured. You heated the skillet with a film of grease until it was just short of smoking, poured in the batter to about half an inch thick, put a lid on the skillet and cooked it over low heat until the top set and the bottom was dark gold and crisp. Then you flipped it, cooked the other side for 3 minutes, and ate it hot with whatever you had. Butter if you were lucky, sorghum molasses if you were in the South, bacon, grease if you were neither. Cornmeal cost 2 cents a pound. A skillet of pan-fried cornbread cost maybe 4 cents total and fed 4 people. Sharecropper families in the Mississippi Delta made this every single day. Not because they lacked imagination, because it worked, because it was fast, because children ate it without complaint, because the skillet was already hot. First, pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. Every meal on this list was made in a single piece of equipment that cost, in 1920, about 50 cents at a hardware store, and lasted, if you treated it with any care at all, for 100 years. The cast iron skillet is not a cooking tool. It is an economic argument. It holds heat evenly and releases it slowly. It moves from stovetop to open fire to oven without complaint. It requires no electricity, no gas infrastructure, no specialized knowledge to maintain. You season it with fat and heat and time. It gets better the more you use it. Modern non-stick pans cost $40, last 3 years, and leach chemicals into your food when the coating scratches. The cast iron skillet cost nothing if someone left you one, which someone almost certainly did, and it will outlast everyone reading this. The women who made these meals understood something about tools that modern kitchen culture has almost entirely forgotten. The best tool is the one that does not break, does not require replacement parts, and improves with use. Every single meal on this list was built around that understanding, not around flavor profiles, not around presentation, around the iron fact that you had one pan and it had to do everything. Number 11. Milk, gravy, and biscuit. You made the biscuits first, or you did not make them at all, because biscuits require an oven, or at minimum a Dutch oven with coals, and some families had that and some did not. But the milk gravy happened in the skillet. You rendered a tablespoon of bacon grease, added 2 tablespoons of flour, stirred it over medium heat until the flour went pale gold and smelled like popcorn, then poured in a cup of whole milk slowly, whisking constantly until the gravy thickened and bubbled. Salt, black pepper, a heavy hand on the pepper. You split the biscuits and poured the gravy over them until the plate was white and steaming. In the rural South, this was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes supper. Flour cost about 3 cents a pound in 1940. Milk cost about 12 cents a quart. A full skillet of milk gravy over 4 biscuits cost under 20 cents and fed a family of 4. There is a reason this is still on the menu at diners from Alabama to Idaho. Not because it is fashionable, because it is correct. Because fat and starch and heat produce something that fills a body and warms it and keeps it moving through a cold morning. Number 10, fried cabbage with salt pork. You sliced a head of cabbage into rough strips, no precision required. And rendered a few pieces of salt pork in the skillet until the fat ran clear and the meat crisped at the edges. Then you added the cabbage directly to that hot fat, pressed it down with the back of a spoon, and let it cook without stirring for 3 or 4 minutes so the bottom layer went brown and slightly caramelized. Then you stirred, pressed again, let it brown again, salt, pepper, a splash of water if it started to stick. 20 minutes total. The cabbage went from raw and sharp to soft and sweet and deeply savory, stained gold by the pork fat. A head of cabbage cost 3 to 5 cents in the 1920s and 1930s across the Midwest and South. Polish and Czech immigrant families in Chicago and Cleveland made this every week. German farm families in Wisconsin made it every week. It was not ethnic food. It was economic food. It happened to be delicious, which was secondary to the fact that it happened to cost almost nothing and kept for 2 days in a cool kitchen. Number 9. Skillet beans and fatback. You soaked dried pinto beans overnight, or you did not soak them and just cooked them longer. You put them in the skillet with a piece of fatback, covered them with water by 2 inches, and simmered them for 2 hours over low heat, adding water as needed until the beans were completely soft and the broth had gone thick and smoky and tasted of pork. Salt at the end, always salt at the end with dried beans, because salt added at the beginning toughens the skins. You ate them over cornbread or with whatever bread was available. A pound of dried pinto beans cost about 8 cents in the 1940s and fed a family of 4 for 2 full meals. The fatback cost another 4 cents. 12 cents. 2 meals. 4 people. The economics are not complicated. They are just stark. Appalachian families, black families in the rural South, Mexican-American families along the Texas border all made versions of this meal, each with their own seasoning, their own bean variety, their own bread on the side. The skillet and the bean and the piece of cured pork were the constants. Everything else was culture. Everything else was identity. The meal itself was survival wearing the clothes of tradition. Number 8. Fried potatoes and onions. You sliced potatoes thin, maybe 1/8 of an inch, and sliced an onion the same. You heated bacon grease in the skillet until it shimmered, added the potatoes in a single layer, pressed them flat, and left them alone for 5 minutes so the bottoms crisped and browned. Then you added the onions, stirred everything together, pressed flat again, left alone again. You repeated this until the potatoes were cooked through and the whole skillet was a tangle of soft potato and sweet caramelized onion with crisp brown edges throughout. Salt, pepper, done. This is it. This is the meal. Potatoes cost about $1 for a 10-pound bag through most of the mid-20th century. A single bag made this meal 8 or 9 times. Families in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, rural Ohio, and across the Great Plains ate fried potatoes and onions as a main course regularly through the Depression and into the 1950s, not as a side dish, as the meal, with bread if you had it, with an egg cracked over the top if you had chickens, alone if you had neither. A cast iron skillet full of fried potatoes and onions smells like a kitchen where someone is still trying. That smell is not nothing. Second pattern. Break. Here is something the food industry does not want you to think about. Every single meal on this list is more nutritious per dollar than anything currently sold in a fast food restaurant. Dried beans contain more protein per serving than a McDonald's hamburger. Fried cabbage contains more vitamin C than a bag of potato chips. Cornmeal mush contains more fiber than a slice of commercial white bread. Salt pork contains more caloric density percent spent than any processed snack food currently on the market. The people who made these meals were not nutritionally ignorant. They were nutritionally precise in the way that only scarcity teaches. They knew that beans and cornbread together made a complete protein. They knew that pork fat was caloric currency that could be spent across multiple meals. They knew that cabbage held through a cold cellar for weeks. and potatoes held for months, and dried beans held for years. The modern food system sells you the idea that cheap food is bad food. That's not a nutritional fact. That is a marketing position. These meals are evidence against it. They kept people alive and working and raising children on budgets that would make a modern grocery shopper faint. Nobody taught this in a class. Nobody wrote it in a book that got preserved. It lived in the hands of women who cooked every day and died knowing things we no longer know. Number 7, Cracklin cornbread in the skillet. 3 ingredients: cornmeal, water or buttermilk. Cracklins. You mixed them into a stiff batter, heated the skillet until a drop of water danced and evaporated on contact, greased it with whatever fat you had, poured in the batter, and cooked it covered on low for 15 minutes, then uncovered on medium for 5 more, until the top was set, and the bottom was nearly black with crust. The cracklins distributed through the batter like small landmines of fat and salt that burst when you bit into them. This was the bread. This was also the protein. This was also the fat. In one piece of cornbread, you had a complete meal component that cost under 5 cents. Miners in eastern Kentucky ate this underground, wrapped in cloth, carried in their pockets, eaten cold at midday in the dark. It held its shape. It did not crumble. It kept them moving. That is what it was designed to do. Number 6, skillet sausage and apples. You sliced smoked sausage into coins and browned them in the dry skillet until the fat rendered and the edges crisped. Then you added sliced apples, skin on, no sugar, just the apples themselves, and let them cook in the sausage fat until they softened and went golden and their natural sugar caramelized against the hot iron. The sweetness of the apple cut the salt of the sausage. The fat of the sausage enriched the apple. They needed nothing else. German immigrant families in Missouri and Illinois made this through the winter months when apples were stored in the root cellar and smoked sausage hung in the smokehouse. A pound of smoked sausage cost about 20 cents in the 1930s. Apples from your own trees cost nothing. This meal was built from what the land gave you and what your own labor preserved. It was not poverty food. It was self-sufficiency food, which is a different thing entirely, and a distinction that matters. Number 5, egg and potato scramble. You fried the potatoes first, sliced thin, in bacon grease, until they were mostly cooked through and starting to brown. Then you cracked 4 eggs directly into the skillet over the potatoes and stirred everything together, folding the eggs through the potatoes as they set, pulling the pan off the heat while the eggs were still slightly glossy. Salt, pepper, done. A family of 4. 4 eggs, 2 potatoes, a tablespoon of grease. In 1945, 4 eggs cost about 15 cents. 2 potatoes cost 2 cents. The grease was free if you had cooked bacon that week. 17 cents. 4 people. 1 meal. Farm families across the Midwest ate this for supper when the day had gone long, and no one had the energy for anything more complicated. It was fast. It was hot. It was protein and starch and fat in the right proportions for a body that had been working since sunrise. The skillet went from stove to table, and everyone ate from it directly, which saved washing a serving dish, which mattered when water came from a well. Number 4, Edna Frazier's skillet soup. This is the meal from the opening. Edna made it from whatever was left at the end of the week. A bone if there was one, a potato or 2, half an onion, dried beans that had been soaking since morning, a handful of whatever green was available. She put everything into the skillet with water to cover, simmered it for an hour, and served it with pan-fried cornbread. The meal changed every week because what was left changed every week. The method never changed. The skillet never changed. Her daughter, interviewed in 1978 by a Kentucky oral history project, said her mother never once used the word recipe. She called it making do. Making do fed 5 children through the worst decade in American economic history. Making do kept a family together in a county where men were dying in mines and companies were cutting wages and the government had not yet arrived with any meaningful help. Making do, in a 10-inch cast iron skillet, over a wood stove, by a woman whose name history almost did not bother to keep, was an act of extraordinary competence. That is what it was. Not suffering. Competence. Third pattern break. Here is what nobody says out loud. The meals on this list were not forgotten because people stopped being poor. People are still poor. They are poorer now in terms of cooking knowledge than at any point in the last 150 years. A family living on a tight budget in 2024 is more likely to buy processed food from a dollar store than to make skillet beans and Fatback. Not because the beans are more expensive, they are not, but because nobody taught them how. The knowledge that lived in the hands of Edna Frazier and Polish grandmothers in Chicago and sharecropper wives in the Mississippi Delta did not get passed down. It got interrupted by convenience culture, by the idea that cooking from scratch was a sign of poverty to be escaped rather than a skill to be preserved, by food companies that spent decades convincing working-class families that a box of processed food was modern and aspirational, and that a pot of dried beans was something you cooked when you had failed. That was a lie. It was a profitable lie, but it was a lie. The women who made these meals were not failing. They were feeding people. They were keeping families alive and together and nourished on budgets that should not have been survivable. What we lost when we stopped making these meals is not just a set of recipes. It is a body of knowledge about how to feed yourself when the system does not care whether you eat. That knowledge is worth recovering. That is why this list exists. Number 3, skillet cornmeal dumplings in broth. You brought broth to a simmer in the skillet. Chicken broth if you had a carcass to boil. Vegetable broth if you did not. Plain salted water if you had nothing else. Then you mixed cornmeal with a little salt and enough boiling water to make a stiff dough, rolled it into small balls the size of a walnut, and dropped them into the simmering broth. You covered the skillet and let them cook for 20 minutes without lifting the lid. The dumplings swelled and softened and absorbed the broth and became something between bread and soup, something that filled the stomach completely and stayed there. Southern black families called versions of this slick dumplings. Appalachian families called it cornmeal dumplings. The name changed by county. The meal was the same. A pot of this cost under 10 cents in the 1940s and fed 4 people a meal that held them through the night. It required no meat. It required no dairy. It required cornmeal, salt, water, and heat. That is all. And it was good. Not good for what it was. Good. Number 2, skillet bread and drippings. This is the meal your grandmother made without naming it. You saved the drippings from every piece of meat you cooked, every rasher of bacon, every pork chop, every sausage, in a jar or a tin beside the stove. When you had bread that was going stale, you sliced it thick, laid the slices in the skillet over medium heat, let them toast in the residual fat left from whatever you had last cooked, and ate them hot with a scrape of the drippings from the jar, spread across the top like butter. The bread tasted of everything that had cooked in that skillet before it, of bacon and onion and pork and smoke and thyme. It tasted like the history of the week's cooking concentrated into a single slice. Families across Britain, Ireland, and their American descendants ate bread and drippings as a regular meal through the 19th and early 20th centuries. It cost nothing because the drippings were a byproduct, and the bread was already there. It was the meal that used the last of everything. It was the meal at the end of the week when the money was gone, and the next payday was 2 days away, and you needed something that tasted like a meal rather than like surrender. Number 1, beans and cornbread. Not pinto beans specifically. Not any specific bean. Whatever dried bean you had, white beans, black-eyed peas, navy beans, great northerns, pintos, limas. You soaked them overnight or you did not. You put them in the skillet with water and whatever pork product you had access to, and you cooked them for as long as it took. You made cornbread in the same skillet after the beans were done, or in a second skillet if you had one. You ate the beans in a bowl with the cornbread crumbled into them, or beside them, or used as a scoop. This is number one because it is the most complete meal on this list. It is a complete protein. It is a complete carbohydrate. It is filling, it is cheap, it is shelf-stable, it is scalable from 1 person to 20, it is impossible to ruin entirely, and it has been feeding poor Americans continuously since before there was a United States. Enslaved people ate it. Frontier families ate it. Depression families ate it. Miners ate it. Sharecroppers ate it. Seniors on fixed incomes ate it. College students ate it. It is the meal that has never stopped working. A pound of dried beans costs under $2 today. A bag of cornmeal costs under $2 today. For $4, you can make a meal that is nutritionally complete, genuinely delicious, and connected to every generation of American working-class life that came before you. That is not poverty food. That is the oldest and most reliable technology for keeping a human being alive and fed and something close to whole. Make one of these this week. The beans and cornbread, the fried potatoes and onions, the skillet potato soup. Pick one. Cook it in whatever pan you have. Sit down at a table and eat it. Then come tell me in the comments which one you made and whether it was better than you expected, because I made the skillet bread and drippings on a Tuesday night with nothing left in the house, and it was one of the best things I've eaten in a year. I want to know if the beans get more love than the fried cabbage. I want to know if anyone else's grandmother made the cornmeal dumplings. These meals are not history. They are instructions. Use them.